Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Ryden. The story is a familiar one. A young person, seemingly on the right track, falls in with the wrong crowd or the wrong person, and life takes a potentially tragic turn. But there is redemption just ahead. Our guest today, Muriel Canfield, has written such a story, and the book is called She Fled God. Welcome, Muriel. Glad to have you with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Now, this may be a work of fiction, but as with all fiction, there is some truth in this story, isn't there?
Absolutely. Probably 30 years before I wrote the book, I interviewed my mother. And of course, I lived with her. And the reason that I have called it fiction basically is not because it isn't all truth, but because I've used drama to
Mhm.
tell her story, scenes and dialogue. So I've written it like a novel, but it's a novel that tells the truth.
Right. Okay. Well, give us a little synopsis of Audrey's story. She's the protagonist. Audrey's story and her relationship with Dan, which started rather quickly, kind of love at first sight on Dan's part. Anyway, I was kind of surprised how quickly Audrey fell for Dan.
I know, I've never really understood it. And I would question her about that a lot. But she was raised in a strict home. Her parents kind of like gave her away to her aunt. And so with her strict upbringing, I kind of think there was this bit of rebellion in her. And he offered excitement. He was handsome. He was from Chicago, which in 1930 was a very exciting place. And
Yeah, if you were a
uh,
gangster.
he was well spoken. He was well spoken, and I think, a spirit of adventure caught her, and she saw an exciting life ahead.
Well, she
And
was
that it was exciting, all right, but not always in a good way.
Well, she was ready to break off her engagement, and he comes into the office looking like he's been beaten up. That's why I thought, gee, she's attracted to that. But like you said, it's this sense of adventure that he
Yeah.
represented, I guess.
Yes. And those were the days of the speakeasies.
Mhm. Right.
And yes. And so he had tripped in a speakeasy.
Mhm.
And I think she thought, well, that's kind of interesting. She had never been in one. So
So is this basically your mom's story?
yes, it's her story. And it's her biography.
Mhm.
And as I said, it's fictionalized, but it is her true biography.
How long did it take you to write that, to finally put it down? It seemed to me like you had interviewed her and then waited kind of a long time to finally get it down. Did you wait a long time or did it just
I
take a
did.
long
I
time to
waited.
put it
I
down?
waited. I waited 30 years.
That's a long time.
Bethany House had just published my memoir, and I was kind of in the memoir mode. So I thought, well, I'll write my mother's, and I got it. I got it all recorded, a lot of things, but I just never felt right about writing it. Then after she died, then I think I was able to sit back a little bit and get the story because it is a very intense story and goes into a lot of deep themes.
Yeah, so she never got a chance to see. Did she ever
Mhm.
see any of the work in progress? Did you
Never,
tell her about
never.
it?
But she knew I wanted to write her book, and that's why she had let me interview her. And I had a bunch of tapes taken from about 30 years before that I could refer to. And of course, with my own eyes, I saw a lot of what happened.
Yeah, what did you see? I mean, how old were you when a lot of this was going on?
Well, always. My father always was a binge drinker, and so I saw it. I saw it early on, and he was not a mean drinker. He was
Mhm.
one of those sloppy drinkers that
Right.
you picture in bars. They go to the bar and have their morning shot, and they slur their words and stumble, but they're not mean. But in the story, he when I am 4 years old, and my mom would have been just still in her 20s, my father got drunk and he slapped her.
Mm.
And that was the only time there was any violence, but she wasn't going to take it. So she packed us all up, and we went to live in Boston with her aunt. And then he came eventually and promised he would never hit her again. Well, he did keep that
Of course.
promise, but he promised he would never drink, but he didn't keep that promise. And so the story goes on, and the drinking gets worse and worse. And mind you, these are depression times. And although my mother was a talented private secretary, she couldn't see how she could get a job to support her children. It was very difficult. Jobs usually went to single women or men. It was not so easy to get a job
Mm-hmm.
as it is today. And she couldn't stand his drinking, so she made a really dangerous decision to drink with him.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he would go on a binge, the pattern was she'd be mad for 3 days, and then eventually she'd start drinking with him. So she never initiated them, but she joined them. And 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 that led her down a terrible path, a path that any alcoholic gets on when they're drinking 6 weeks at a time. The whole family, the children, everything is in uproar.
Yeah.
And you're kind of led by two people not in their right senses. So we children kind of became the parents of my parents.
Mm-hmm.
But at this was never, I knew it was never my mother's desire to lead the life she was leading. I always knew that. And when she was in her 50s, she was having liver trouble. And she went to find out what was going on. Anyway, she was told she could never drink again. And right in the doctor's office, instead of feeling upset or burdened, she felt saved. And just saved from all of that. The decision had been made. No matter what her husband drank, she wasn't going to drink.
Mm-hmm.
She didn't want to die of this liver disease. So um, basically, that started her on a different pattern of life. Um, and she still had a lot to overcome because my father was not faithful. He was not the best husband. One thing he did do was earn a lot of money. He was good at earning money, and he provided a very, I guess you would call it middle class, upper middle class type life. They had 3 houses. They went to Mexico, but all the while she's dealing with a difficult man who drinks, who
Without
binges.
without giving away the ending or
Yeah.
the whole story, without giving it away, there is a faith-based component to it that brought
Yes.
her salvation, really.
Yeah, it did. And that's really where I came in. And maybe one of the real motivators of me finally doing this story, because I was not a Christian in my 30s. And in my mid 30s, through the testimony of a book that I read,
Hmm.
Prison to Praise by Merlin Carruthers, I became a Christian from a book. I had I had no Christian friends. I was living in Canada with my family at the time. And I started calling my mother, and she was living down in the Keys, in the Florida Keys. And and I would tell her about Jesus and tell her how wonderful he was, and um, and then ask her if she wouldn't consider it. And this went on week after week after week. And finally, every week I would call and I'd say, "Well, Mom, have you become a Christian yet?" And one day she said, "Yes."
Hmm.
And so that started from my mom, a totally different life. The girl that she had been in high school, she was very popular and outgoing,
Right.
but had been so suppressed with my dad, just came back. And she started ministering to people. She joined a church. She became chairman of the social hour. And it was a very busy church down in the Keys. And she started going to the nursing homes and feeding the people that couldn't eat.
Hmm.
And My father had a stroke, and for 5 years, he didn't want to go to a nursing home. He was a pretty selfish man, and so she took care of him at home with the help of other nurses. So she was really devoted herself to other people, and she just shone. It's kind of hard to say, but if there's a certain look in a Christian's eyes, and you can just tell that there's something very special about that person.
Right.
And that was my mother. She just shone.
Mm.
And so after my dad died, even further, she was able to do a lot, and she finally became a Key West Woman of the Year.
No
She
kidding.
was, yeah, she was doing so much with volunteering and helping, then and then being officers in certain clubs, but just kind of went back to the kind of person she would have been if she hadn't run into my father.
Right,
And
right.
yeah.
How difficult, I mean, maybe you can give some advice to authors about how to write fictionalized versions of true events that people you're writing about may recognize themselves in. I mean, you want to be honest, but at the same time, you don't want to hurt people's feelings. So it's how do you balance that? Wait till
Well, I
they
think
die?
well, I think if I understand you right, for one thing, in my own writing style, even from my first book with Bethany, I told that in a dramatic form. So there's something within my writing that can get across a message better if I'm using the techniques in storytelling, the thoughts in the head, the movements around the room, and so that helps me to that helped me to tell my mother's story in a way that the readers are really relating to it. I've had an awful lot of reviews on it, and they've said they could feel her pain, they could feel her emotion, they could feel her hopelessness. And then the readers would say they could feel how little tiny by little bit she started to heal, and they appreciated it wasn't fast, that they
Mhm.
could see her healing coming. So I would say that although it wasn't a narrative where you're relating what happened, it was shown, not told. And so they were seeing through visualizing and being in
Right.
the room with my mother, her change. And many of them mentioned um, that they saw her resilience. They saw her pushing through her struggles, and it meant a lot to them because my feeling is that the book gives readers who are in struggles hope that they can, through resilience, through trying, putting yourself in the situation and trying to do better, but also through faith, through
Mhm.
loving the Lord, loving Jesus. And Jesus did a lot for my mother. And
Sure.
so between the two, she became quite a remarkable woman.
Mhm.
And I myself am happy to see this story out there. I'm very blessed. I'm blessed that readers learn from my mother,
Mhm.
learn that they too can have a different life
Well,
than
now
the one
you
I'm
wrote
struggling with.
You wrote an award-winning book called Beaten and Battered about the plight
Yes.
of battered women for whom you have a real soft spot in your heart. What can the church do better in an effort to help people like Audrey or Dan for that matter?
Yes. Actually, you picked the reason why I wrote Broken and Battered. I felt that the church was not helping abused women or even women like my mother, um, because a woman will go, and it's not easy to go to your pastor and say, my husband, for instance, the one maybe singing in the choir or doing this and that for the church, is abusing me.
Mhm.
And often that will be taken lightly. Well, we'll pray for you. And maybe they do, but that is not the answer. And that's not the support they need. They need somebody to listen to them, to hear what they're saying, and to let them know some options uh, that can help them deal with their situation. Maybe even get out of their situation. Maybe they don't belong in it. And in that book, one of the ladies, I wrote half the book was true stories of ladies, which I wrote in my usual fashion of drama. But one of them was the wife of a Methodist minister in a very large church. And when she went to his uh, superiors, they wouldn't even believe her that he would do
Mm,
that. So
yeah.
what she went through, the agony she went through.
Mm,
So so I would say, when a woman, whether her husband's drinking or hurting her, abusing her emotionally or physically, if she listened to her and believe her,
mhm.
it isn't easy for her to be telling you that. And then think about how you might be able to provide some good information for her to deal with her situation.
Well, the book is
I do want
called,
to add, it isn't good to tell somebody what to do,
sure.
but it is good to provide some information.
Mhm. Right. Well, the book is called She Fled God, and in the book, she comes back to God too. So
Yes.
it's a great message. Thanks for joining us, Muriel. Now you're free to stroll the beach outside your inn on Lake
Yeah.
Michigan and
Yeah.
come up with other stories to write.
Well, thank you. I would love to.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being with us. And thank you, folks, for spending a few minutes with us on the Global Book Network. I'm Paul Ryden. We'll see you next time.